Good afternoon. I'm recording this video for our US history class, and the PowerPoint is uploaded under Files in Canvas. So let's start with this chapter 6. It's about a new nation, that is what happened after the War of Independence, which, as you recall, ended in 1783. And there was a hiatus for a couple of years up until the first president was elected and inaugurated here in New York, the Federal Hall by Wall Street in 1789. It's important to remember that in 1789, as our first president was being inaugurated, French Revolution started, but we'll leave that for Friday. We deal with the French Revolution on Friday. For now, we're dealing with the first, I think, 6 paragraphs in chapter 6. I'm looking at the PowerPoint right now, and let's start with the first one. What happened after 1783, after the War of Independence? Well, we usually say that the United States was created, but that's not completely accurate. 2 new countries were created. Tens of thousands of loyalists, some say as many as 70,000, left the United States during and following the wars. You remember Benedict Arnold. We call him a traitor, but the British call him a loyalist. The great majority of those people received land and subsidies for resettlement in British colonies in North America, especially in the provinces of Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, and Quebec. Also, British colonies were created in Upper Canada, that would be Ontario, and what they mean by Upper Canada is up the St. Lawrence River. So it's actually the other way around. So Lower Canada is Quebec, and Upper Canada is Ontario, whereas Ontario is to the south of Quebec. Anyways, just a FYI. So Ontario and New Brunswick were created in Canada, new colonies there, out of which came Canada. The Crown, British Crown, gave loyalists those lands in compensation for the losses in the United States. All right, so that would be our first slide. Let's move to the second one, which says Shays' Rebellion. Shays' Rebellion is an interesting thing. It's as any rebellion in history, it's a symptom of a larger problem. And the larger problem was that wars are not cheap, as the British government realized after the 7 Years' War, and after the French realized after the War of American Independence, and the American realized after the War of American Independence too. People were in debt, colonies were in debt, public institutions were in debt, war cost a lot of money, and there's also a tremendous cost in the lost time that is not available for labor and other activities that we do to make a living. During the war, you have to do other things, as you have to do other things during the epidemics, like we are doing right now. So we'll deal with these consequences of not being to function normally later on. Daniel Shays, born in 1747 and died in 1825, was a veteran of the War of Independence. He was a kind of a hero of sorts. 1780, he participated in all the major battles, Bunker Hill and other things that were happening there in the vicinity of Boston. He was from Massachusetts, and General Lafayette presented him with a sword in honor of his military services. He had to sell that sword for a couple of dollars to pay off his debt. So when the new governor of Massachusetts was elected in 1785, Shays started, what do we call it today, community organizing, and against the measures that the government of Massachusetts instituted, trying to collect the back taxes, levying additional property taxes to raise funds for the Massachusetts portion of the debt, and these kind of things. So as after the war, the government tried to put its house in order, trying to settle the debt. It put pressure on people like Daniel Shays, who said, well, why did I do this? And those kind of thinking leads to rebellion. Even people like John Adams observed that these levies imposed by the Massachusetts government in 1785 were heavier than the people could bear. And John Adams was known for not being particularly a rebellious person. Anyways, the uprising in Massachusetts, the Shays Rebellion, convinced people across the 13 colonies that something needed to be done. And after years of discussions and going back and forth and thinking what to do and living under the Articles of Confederation, which anyways were not much of a change in comparison to what was going on under the British rule. That is, each colony was living separately and managing its own affairs. They decided to meet, they would be like 12 out of 13 colonies or states at this point. Rhode Island was absent. They decided to meet in Philadelphia, in the old Pennsylvania State House in the summer of 1789, to hammer out some sort of agreement to deal with the issues that arose with the independence or after the independence. I'm looking now at slide number 4, the Constitutional Convention of 1789, and there is a nice picture there of the old Pennsylvania State House, which is now called Independence Hall. And I'm looking at the picture of Independence Hall. Slide number 5. Beautiful picture of Philadelphia and this colonial building. Anyways, it says here on the slide, James Madison versus William Patterson. Actually, just one T, sorry. William Patterson. Oops. What is that about? Well, they were discussing how to organize political life in the 13 states that gained independence in 1783, but didn't exactly know what to do with that independence. And following the ideology of the Enlightenment, people were looking to write down a constitution. Constitution be a set of rules which regulate the way the state operates. So constitution is a rule book for the state, and it's very important. It's often hard to understand, and people are often lost in the minutiae and details that surround the Constitution. But these two people that are mentioned on slide number 5, James Madison and William Patterson of New Jersey, James Madison of Virginia, were associated with the two main proposals that were on the table. The first was slide number 6, Virginia Plan, suggested by James Madison, which advocated something that we call direct democracy or kind of it. A representative democracy would be a better term. But the point is that the people elect the representatives, and you divide the population into equal portions. And I don't know, nowadays it's about every 600,000 people elect their representative to the House of Representatives. So people are represented proportionately to their numbers. That proposal was called the Virginia Plan, and it was suggested by James Madison. That plan was more radical, so to speak. We'll get to explain these terms of what it means, radical, conservative, in politics as soon as we get to French Revolution. We'll get into this, but for now, we can call it more radical, or something like a representative democracy, representation according to the population size. The other plan, that would be the slide number 7, was a New Jersey plan suggested by William Patterson. Interestingly enough, here in our state of New Jersey, William Patterson was a student of a lawyer, Richard Stockton, and both of these people are commemorated by the names of two great state universities here, William Patterson University and Richard Stockton University down in the South Jersey. New Jersey plan, to get back to the Constitution, was the exact opposite of the Madison plan or the Virginia plan, and it advocated representation according to the states. That is, that each state has the same equal voice in the federal government. Around these two proposals, the Virginia plan and the New Jersey plan, or the James Madison plan and the William Patterson plan, formed the first political parties. Those who supported the New Jersey plan were called the Federalists, and those who supported the Virginia plan were called Democratic Republicans, Anti-Federalists, or simply just Democrats. These people were the predecessor of the modern day Democratic Party. The Virginia plan was something that favored large states like Virginia. Virginia was the largest state at the time, and since it had the largest population, it would have the most representatives in the House of Representatives and the greatest influence in the government. And that's something that the Democrats are going to argue for several generations now. We have James Madison, we'll have Thomas Jefferson arguing the same thing. In the future, we'll have Andrew Jackson advocating the same sort of principle. Give power to the people. It's a very appealing principle, but it's especially appealing to large states like Virginia. Smaller states like New Jersey and others were not in favor of it. The problem was that they would be outvoted every time there is a vote. So even though they have representatives in the Congress, they're always in the minority and they lose. Therefore, Jersey plan was following more in line with the Articles of Confederation. That is, equal voice for each state, regardless of if it's a small or a large state. Let's see a couple of things about William Patterson. He was a strong nationalist who supported the Federalist Party. Went on to become the first senator from New Jersey. Then became a governor of New Jersey, and finally justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, appointed by George Washington. The settlement was reached in what is called the Connecticut Compromise, and that is that there would be two chambers in the Congress, where the people's representatives meet, and those chambers would represent the population. That would be House of Representatives, and the Senate, where each state is represented by equal number two senators. Especially thorny issue was the issue of slavery, because there was a bit of hypocrisy on both sides. Both sides, I mean the North and the South, southern states that had slaves, and northern states that didn't. Southern states wanted the slaves to count as citizens when it came to representation in the Congress. So the more slaves they had, the more representation they would have in the Congress. But they didn't want them to count when they had to pay taxes. Of course, the northern interests were exactly the opposite. So they came to an unsavory compromise, and compromises usually stink. But the compromise was that each slave would count as a 3/5 of a person. That's why it's called the 3/5 compromise. And it's one of those issues that the newly independent American states inherited from the colonial period, and from the time when slaves were brought in from 1619 onwards into Virginia, other southern states, and the United States in general. Also, I'm looking at slide 8.